As Far as Anyone Knows is a mostly Latino history podcast where each week your hosts, Minerva Angeles
and Fredo B,
take turns sharing some Latino history,
bad jokes,
and ancestral love.
Welcome to another episode of As Far as Anyone Knows. I'm Fredo B.
I'm Minerva Angeles.
And today we're going to be talking a little bit about, I'm going to give you a brief history on Latinx images on film. But before that, Minerva, you got something on your mind that you want to share?
Absolutely not. There's nothing going on up here. I mean, we can get into what are we watching or what have we watched. We saw Soul.
Yeah, we did watch Soul. But I think before we get into Soul, we could get into Soul. I think what you're experiencing, a lot of people are experiencing, where it's just like this brain drain, where we're just really all tired all the time. You know, it's the week of Christmas, it's the holidays happening. You know, it's rough. It is rough out here.
I don't know if it's... I mean, yes, of course, all those things are, like, really real. It's just, like, COVID brain, which is a lot like pregnancy brain. If anyone has ever been pregnant, I have been pregnant. It's a process. Your body is going through a lot. You are creating eyeballs and stuff, and that's a lot of work. And your brain focused on all the things you have to do as a parent. Even if you're pregnant, you know, when you're pregnant for the first time, it's like all the things you're doing for the first time that you're having to prepare for, on top of being absolutely and utterly exhausted by physically creating a person. If it's not your first time, you're preparing for how you're going to deal with life now with an additional person, because that's in some ways harder. So it's kind of like that, but collective. It's like we're all pregnant. And let me explain to you how. We're all just having to relearn all of life. Everybody is like, there are a whole bunch of new rules. I have to wash my hands every 70 seconds. I have to wear a mask and remember to wear a mask, but I have to also know what kind of mask and what is acceptable in certain places and what is not acceptable in certain places, and what a face shield is, and what exactly is a time when someone is contagious. Is it when they're asymptomatic? Is it when they're showing symptoms? How far before they showed symptoms? It's like a whole thing, and we're all sort of having to relearn all these things about how to behave around people. And then obviously the entire economic situation and how that's affecting everybody's emotional, mental, and also just physical well-being. There's so many pieces to it. Even at work, like there are things that have changed at work where there are new procedures and policies and processes, and all of these things are new, and people are now having to process that. So everything like you did know really well before, you're just kind of like, I swear I was smart. I knew that, and now I don't know that anymore. It's COVID brain. Okay? I was at Target the other day, and I had a whole slip of COVID brain. And so I go to Target for the first time in a long time. And, you know, the Starbucks in the Target is there, so that's my reward at the end of this arduous journey through Target before the holidays. So I order my drink. So, like, my head is now, I gotta get out of here. Like, this is too much. I've been here long enough. I'm done. This is the last phase of the game. I'm looking at the lady, and she's, you know... Just a side note, what is it about the Target Starbucks that is, like, significantly slower than the regular There were 4 people back there. It doesn't make sense to me. It just isn't the same, and I need to understand what that's about. And no hate to any of the staff. I saw that they were working so hard. Nobody was not doing anything. It didn't make any sense. What is it about systematically? What's going on there? I need the deets. I need all the details. Anyway, that's a side note. Please, at me with more information on what's going on there. So the lady comes and she hands me my drink. And, oh my God, Fredo, as she's holding the drink and passing it to me, she's not putting it down. She's passing it to me. So I go straight into people-pleasing gratitude of random strangers working hard mode. And I felt bad. And then I put my hand out too. And then our hands touched. And then we locked eyes. There was a full moment of like, you know, like the TikTok, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no.
Yeah.
We both, like, it was real, bro. Like, we had a moment of like, did we just touch each other?
Wash hands.
Right.
Immediately.
Right.
Immediately.
So I, of course, had sanitized prior to touching her because I said, like, anytime I see sanitizer, I go ahead and get that puppy on. But you know, she probably washes her hands like 80 times a day. It's probably required. And, you know, it was fine, but it was definitely terrifying. It was definitely this moment of like, we forgot the rules. Part of my explanation of like COVID brain. We are all on just operating in two worlds. We're in like the new world order, and then we're remembering our past lives, which was just 10 short months ago. And
10 months ago? What?
Was it 10 months ago?
I don't know.
Yeah, it was
feels
like
like 10 years.
Okay, I think it was 10 months ago. Anyway, COVID brain is real, y'all. Anybody experiencing COVID brain out there, which is essentially everyone, I feel you. You get a lot of empathy and support from me.
I just forget what days it is. I'm at home dad. I don't go anywhere. Going to the store is a pleasure.
Right. You are a remote worker. I am.
You go to work.
Go to work. Yes.
And in a physical space. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, you also mentioned watching Soul. Let's talk about Soul a little bit. For those of you who don't know what Soul is, I assume that you don't have children.
Right.
Congratulations.
Good for you.
But for those of you who do have children and are aware of Soul, it is the newest Disney Pixar animated film. It's hard. It's a little heavy in terms of like what to talk about in terms of the movie and its plot point. It's really about, it's a little existential, really. So it's about the meaning of life and what is your life and what is your soul. The main character in the film essentially dies in the beginning of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of, I mean, this is a kid's movie. It's an animation. It's a child's movie. It's not very clear to younger children, you know, that someone has died. They fell, and now there's like this little blue thing. Oh, no spoilers. But anyway, I mean, well, you know the person dies, and you know that it's about their soul. Without trying to give too many spoilers, what I thought was really interesting is that, you know, and maybe it's because I'm so out of touch with myself these days, Jamie Foxx's character connects himself to the world through the way he experiences music. And he's connected music to like sort of his meaning or his overall experience of the world. Like he experiences the world through music. He is music, and music in him, that's what it is. That's his whole reason for living or whatever.
More specifically, jazz.
Jazz. And it's really good. It's actually really, the music is amazing. What he learns in that journey, what we experience as like humans in real life, IRL, I mean, it was really profound. It was a nice reminder. We are not our experiences, and we are not the stuff we really like. We are not the stuff we're really good at. We are just human beings that are not tethered to things or experiences. And even on deeper levels, that means like certain experiences, even trauma, like certain things you go through, don't necessarily define you and don't necessarily define your purpose or your meaning. And I don't know if that's what they meant.
That was your takeaway. I'll be honest, I think it was open for interpretation. Because they didn't really get too heavy into any sort of religious stuff. Or
No.
really like, you know, your soul, your being, your essence of like who you are. And then even when they talked about like the afterlife, it was just like, oh, you know, the great beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't like about religion. Although as people who don't actively participate in any sort of religious affiliations or things like that, you know, it was a little awkward or to talk about it or try to explain it to our 5-year-old daughter, because she had a lot of questions. She's like, what? What is happening? What is a soul? Do I have a soul? And we're just like, oh man, okay.
She was asking really simple questions that had really complex answers, and that even got me thinking about it more. So I think I just think the whole thing was great.
Yeah,
I'm really happy.
It's great to see a film that the main character is really more, and gets in line with what I'm going to be talking about today, really about the representation of people of color, Black people, indigenous people, Latinos, and how we're represented in films, and how kids can see themselves, or people that they know in movies. And I think wasn't always there. Not just Disney, but like Hollywood in general. And Minerva, you know this about me. Like, I love movies. I love everything about them. Like, I even like the shitty ones. Like, I find them entertaining because I can find something that I will hold on to. I'll still say, oh, that was a shitty movie. But there's something that I could pull from that I'm like, well, it made me really laugh. Some of my earliest memories are of that, watching movies at home with my family, watching. There were only like 5 channels back then, 4, whatever. In the day, back in the 1900s, there were only 3 channels, kids. Or actually going to the movies. Like, I have very vivid memories of going as a young child to the movies, even younger than our 5-year-old. Going to the movies. Were all the movies appropriate for my siblings to be taking me to? No, but we went because they had to watch me, so like I had to go. And that's why to this day I'm still scared of Freddy Krueger. Thanks, guys. But growing up, I soaked in everything Disney. Then as a teen, I got a little bit more into like the slasher and horror movies. Who didn't love Scream, right? I Know What You Did Last Summer, all those movies. And then as an adult, like, I started expanding on my film knowledge and really going back and watching old, what they consider classic movies, the black and white films. I was amazed by what they were able to accomplish even back then without CGI that we have now. And there was some really innovative stuff that I appreciate. One thing though that struck me while watching these films was the lack of representation of people of color, Black people or Latinos, indigenous, Asians. They're kind of not there, and if they're there, it is not usually portrayed in the best of light. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to love film and kind of like love the history of Hollywood and the films and the golden age, but also have this knowledge of like, well, it wasn't the greatest. This undertone. Mm-hmm. So you're watching these ostensibly great films, but you also know like, well, they didn't really portray us in the best of lights. At best. That was the best, because then at the worst, they erased us completely from the narrative. Mm. So I'm not sure which one is worse for you or for anybody. Now, with this episode, like, I really thought about, like, what am I going to talk about? Because it could be very broad, but I wanted to focus more on, the stereotypes that Hollywood has sort of perpetuated about Latinos. I identify as an Afro-Indigenous Latino, so my lens that I view film through is sort of, it's through that worldview. Now, Hollywood has been making movies since the early 1900s, and since pretty much its inception, we've had stereotypes about Latinos in film. Okay, but before we get into that, we're going to take a little journey. I have to take it back, because to give context about what's going on in California and Hollywood. So, taking it back, way back to 1848, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. You know the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo so well.
Don't we all?
But for those of you who aren't familiar, This was a treaty that officially ended the Mexican-American War and gave the U.S. ownership of Mexican land that would become the states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It also shaped the southern border with the Rio Grande and Texas. So, yeah, up until 1910, the population of California was relatively small to what it is today. It was a little over 1 million people in the entire state. It's a big state so it was mostly rural, farm. It was a culture based on agriculture, farming. It was similar to what it is today. Like, everybody tends to think of California. Oh, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco. The major city ports. But like, really, it's mostly just farm, wineries, fruits. So the biggest. So that was in 1900, and then by 1910, the population grew almost double. So now we're talking about over 2 million people living in California, the biggest cluster being in Los Angeles. This is due to a couple things, and by 1910, the film industry really grew. It boomed. So before 1910, movies were actually made here in the East Coast, in New Jersey and New York, but a lot of people, they moved it to California because Thomas Edison kept suing people for using his stuff. Thomas Edison had a lot of patents on a lot of things that we use for movies for.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So he wasn't letting them make movies?
Yeah, because he wanted to make all the money. So, and his movies weren't really that creative. Like, it was just like shots of a train moving.
Things that people like Thomas Edison might find interesting.
But that's what movies were back, in the earlier part. It really wasn't anything. It wasn't a narrative form. It didn't become really more of a narrative form until like the 1910s and the silent film era. So now what you have going on, right? You have 1910s film industry booms in Hollywood. Silent films were being made for low cost and making stars of former vaudeville performers. As the film industry grew, people from the East Coast, where the films used to be made, moved to the West Coast. What the hell does all of this have to do with Latinx images in film? I'm getting it. Remember, I said California was mostly farmers. So, huge difference between the farmers, the Californians that lived there already, versus the people moving in, those fast-talking East Coasters. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't long before the newly relocated folks clashed with the existing groups. One of them being the existing Mexican and Mexican-American populations. Side note, I want to make sure that I make a distinction between Mexican and Mexican-American. Mexicans being those who migrate back and forth to do, the farm labor. And then Mexican-Americans are those families who've been here or been there pretty much since the Treaty of Hidalgo. Mm-hmm. If you know their chants, like, we didn't cross the border crossed us. That's why, because they've been living there since before it was the United States, back when it was Mexico. So you have this clash, and I suspect this is what leads to the first stereotype that I'm going to be talking about. And the first stereotype, Charles Ramírez Berg, he wrote a book called Latino Images in Film. And
his name was...
Okay, very clear.
Okay,
his name was Charles Ramírez Berg.
Okay, so...
I didn't try to make his name Ramírez Berg.
Okay, because I was about to say, that's an interesting hybrid.
No.
Okay, because that's, like, hilarious.
Charles Ramírez Berg. He
wrote
the book Latino Images in Film, and he categorized, he made these terms up. So the first one being the bandido or bandit, which is an outlaw. Mm-hmm. So the earliest silent films quickly identified the Mexican. It was always Mexican, even when it wasn't, as the screen's villain. He robbed, murdered, pillaged, raped, cheated, gambled, lied. Basically did everything bad that you could think of.
Oh, I thought you were just like quoting a Trump speech.
Some bad hombres.
Yeah, there were some bad hombres in those 1910 movies.
Yeah. So, Minerva, I'm going to read a few movie titles and see if you can spot a recurring theme. Okay, so we have 1908's The Greaser's Gauntlet, 1911's Tony the Greaser, 1914's Bronco Billy and the Greaser, and 1914's The Greaser's Revenge.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so what are these, like cowboy movies?
Yes, so greaser was, or still remains, a derogatory term that goes all the way back to the Mexican-American War that U.S. troops called Mexicans during that time. The slur likely derived from what was considered, a low occupation, typically held by Mexicans, which is the greasing of axle wagons. Mm-hmm. They also greased animal hides that were taken to California, where Mexicans loaded onto clipper ships, which are called greasers as well.
All incredibly necessary work that is probably fine, noble work, needed work, stuff that nobody could have gotten around without. So
shout out to the Mexicans who did that kind of work, but because at the end of the day, they use that term as a derogatory term for them, which is again interesting because like when I heard greaser and when I was doing my research on this, I was like, I've never heard that term before outside of Grease Lightning.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, I was just confused because I thought Grease Lightning came out so many years later.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
So that was what was confusing, but it's unfortunate that an occupation that is so necessary would get like a bad rap or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, or just have a negative connotation simply because it's, in some cases connected to Mexican or Mexican-American people. Mm-hmm. I imagine that there are people doing that work elsewhere that are not Mexican.
Yeah, I mean...
So, like, how annoying is that?
So again, in the context of what was going on, the United States was at war with Mexico. Mm-hmm. So, therefore, it wasn't like a love fest, I guess understandably, people, they hated each other. I'm not sure. Because, the United States won the war. We don't know what Mexicans were calling Americans.
I'm sure we could find out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting to know. Yeah.
So another thing that added to this image of a violent Mexican, in 1910, the Mexican Revolution started. So the Mexican Revolution was pretty much a rebellion against the high. It was a class system, so lower middle class people who were typically more mestizo or indigenous versus the upper white class of Mexico. Mm-hmm. So, one of the biggest stars to come out of this era was Pancho Villa. Have you heard of Pancho Villa?
I'm familiar with the name.
I think most of us who grew up in a Latino home have heard of the name, but we really don't know too much about him, right? He's just one of those many characters that kind of live in our peripheral. Mm-hmm. But because of, colonialism and white supremacy, we don't really learn about these kind of characters in history. So Pancho Villa was a real-life revolutionary that turned into a movie star. The way that happened was that a white American film director was like, hey, what if we just take a camera down to Mexico and film these battles that are happening? That's what they did. They went down and they were like, oh, this is great stuff.
and thus was born the documentary.
No.
Like, is that not a documentary?
So it wasn't a documentary because they got Pancho Villa to agree to be filmed, and so the lines were blurred.
Was it like scripted reality television?
Yes. So it was reality television born, really, because Pancho Villa agreed to this because, they were like, hey, we'll give you money. And Pancho's like, yeah, the revolution needs to be funded. We need to buy ammunition. We need to buy food for the soldiers. We need things. So Pancho Villa agreed to it. He agreed to it so much that he would wait. He would only attack, during daylight hours. He would wait for the film crew to set up before he went and attacked.
Well, first of all, you got to get your light. 100%, girl.
Exactly.
I feel you on that.
He got to find his light.
Right, exactly. And, listen, we all got to be camera ready.
Exactly.
And so I'm not going to be ready before the crew's ready.
And he would, make up like little sayings before he went out into the battlefield. It was great stuff, one of the most famous ones is the Life and Times of Pancho Villa. I haven't watched it. There's a whole HBO film too starring Antonio Banderas, who we'll talk briefly about later on.
I would really hope so.
But so yeah, Pancho Villa. He's so of course with a lot of things when the U.S. gets involved. Things tend to backfire of its intended purposes. This had a negative impact as the filmmakers exploited Pancho Villa and his battles and a lot of the exploits. So instead of focusing on the reasons for the revolution, really focusing on the politics behind it, they emphasized the gory details of the battles. So, like, this is a quote from a New York Times review back then. They were like, the New York Times noted that barbarous Mexico tends to linger on the burning of dead bodies on the battlefield. So, yeah, needless to say, it wasn't great. It wasn't a good PR move on Pancho Villa's, view. So we have that. So, we have the Bandido. We have these greaser films coming out, right? So things were getting out of hand. They were so out of hand that the Mexican government issued a statement. They were like, yo, we had it. If you keep, we're going to ban any films that portray the Mexican people in a negative light. Yeah. So any not just that film, but we're going to ban any films made by the studio. And Mexico was a pretty big, film place as well in terms of like. Now today it would be comparable to like China in terms of like it's the box office numbers, right? You look to not only the U.S. but you look to China. Back then it used to be like the U.S. and Mexico. We need Mexico to bring in more dollars.
I mean, arguably, we still need Mexico.
Oh yeah. It's still the international film industry is still big. It's we look for
but in like many ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Mexico is still very much carrying America in many ways. Additionally, I feel like I don't have to say this, but I'm going to say it because I just feel like it's just ridiculous. So essentially, Americans have been not only exploiting, but like portraying Mexicans in a negative light for profit since the inception of the American-Mexican relationship.
Pretty much. Yeah.
No, I know. So I know this is. So I know this,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And we all know this. It's just, it's when you hear it in different ways, in ways that you haven't heard it before, that you're like, gross. Why are you like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Mexico issues this warning, this threat, we will stop showing your movies, all of them. And so, of course, what does Hollywood do? They're like, they get woke. They're like, okay, cool. We'll just show Mexico as dignified people. Okay, no, I'm lying. They didn't do that.
I was like, I don't know who you're talking about.
Instead, they rewrote things to be a little more vague and more thinly veiled as, not Mexico, but Mexico. So, for example, there was a movie released in 1928 called The Dove. And it was about, the main character, whose name was Don Jose Maria y Sandoval. Who was played by a white man, who considered himself, quote, the best damn caballero en Costa Roja, which was not in Mexico.
Right, I was going to say, where's Costa Roja?
Not Mexico. So they started making up places. They really just made up names. They kind of pulled out exotic sounding names without it being Mexico.
They just put like two Spanish words together.
But according to the title cards in the movie Costa Roja, again, not in Mexico, it was in the Mediterranean. So again, this is how they got away with
a Spanish named place.
But again, it was still very thinly veiled. It was very interesting. Again, they kept this on for like a little while until. They were like, fuck it, we don't give a fuck anymore, and they continued. Then they went back to they were clearly being Mexico.
So the thing is, like, the damage was done already at that point, right? Like, so, and this is like what a lot of this machine, the racist machine, sort of profits off of, right? The existence of it feeds into the ideas. So I don't have to tell you I'm talking about a Mexican person or that I'm portraying a Mexican person. I've done that enough in so many ways that you just need to see it at this point to know that that's the box your brain is going to put that in. Mm-hmm. So fuck that. Okay, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, the bandido stereotype, it has evolved into what we now see as the gangbanger, the drug cartel, drug dealer. And it's now not just limited to Mexicans, right? Like, because we have a wider range of people and countries. I guess they realize, there's other countries other than Mexico, right? Let's talk about the Colombian drug lords, the Cuban drug lords.
Mm. Other Mexicos. Yes. The other Mexicos.
Let's talk about the Puerto Rican gangbangers in the Bronx. So like famously, obviously, Scarface is the one that comes to mind. One of my earliest memories of this kind of stereotype. Again, not played by a Latino.
With like Al Pacino's, Cuban accent. Ay, mijo.
It's terrible.
It's
honestly borders offensive, but like for whatever reason,
it is offensive. We just don't. It's not collectively offensive because of how respected Al Pacino is.
No, well, let's talk about it. How heavily we lean into, as a culture, we were like, yeah.
I mean, we have glorified Scarface. It should have been named Starface.
Scarface and Carlito's Way, again, with Al Pacino. How many times somebody quotes Benny Blanco from the Bronx. So these are still things that we deal with and that we kind of just accept in our culture and communities, right? Mm-hmm.
Which is why I don't want to hear nothing from nobody when J-Lo plays an Italian woman. I don't want to hear it.
We're going to talk about J-Lo actually in our next stereotype. But
can't wait.
First, we're going to talk... So the next stereotype is really the Latin lover. I'm grouping two of these together because I feel, to me, they go hand in hand. So you have the Latin lover / harlot or sex pot.
Ugh.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Latin lover first, right? The Latin lover, he was suave, debonair. He got all the ladies, right? The most famous of these Latin lovers was Rudolph Valentino, who was from Italy. So really, the name really just derives from like anybody who's a little more like ethnic looking. So like maybe you have dark hair, not blonde. You have dark eyes. You're olive skin complexion. This is the Latin lover type thing. There were quote unquote Latin lovers who were of Latino descent. So one of the more famous ones was actually Valentino's rival. His name was Ramon Navarro, or actually, let's say Ramon Navarro. I'll tell you why right now. So he was a Mexican actor. He's an actor of Mexican descent. Navarro was born José Ramón Gil Samaniego. A director suggested to him that he change his name to get better opportunities. And it worked, because when he changed his name from Ramon, José Ramón Gil Samaniego to just Ramon Navarro, which he just kind of picked this name out of I don't know where.
It's just like what, 2 names are better than 4? I mean, is that what? Because there's like both Latino names,
Latino sounding names, right? They're ethnic enough, but not too ethnic. You can't be around going José Ramón Gil Samaniego, right?
No, well, I mean, I can't imagine, people trying to say Samaniego. I get it. Okay. But it's also...
And I'm sure they pronounced it Ramon. It wasn't no Ramon.
And
Ramon.
Thank you. Why did you do it? It was my joke. Okay, so I just want to be clear that Fredo definitely knows that one of my favorite scenes in... what's it?
Romeo and Michelle's.
High school reunion. The O Ramon scene. It's just. I mean, the woman deserved an Oscar for that. It was a beautiful performance.
She has an Oscar.
Yeah, but
not for that movie.
No, definitely not for that movie. And I guess, again, highly underrated movie. When she does the Ramon, it's I'm like, yo, shout out / sorry to any person named Ramon, because anytime if you pronounce it Ramon, like if you don't say Ramon, if you say Ramon, I'm like, hi, hi, nice to meet you. If you say like Ramon, in my head I'm like, oh, Ramon, and then I'm like, nice to meet you, Ramon. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. We digress, but. So, Navarro, he changed his name, and it worked. So his big breakout role was in Ben-Hur, the 1920s silent version, not the Charlton Heston version that came out later. So he was a major star. He was like a romantic lead for a while there during the height of the silent film era. With the emergence of talking films, though, those opportunities became less and less for him to be the romantic lead, because Ramon, he was born in Mexico. His first language was Spanish, so he did have a heavy accent, or a noticeable accent when he spoke English. So again, it's that thing of like, we want your features, we want your look, but we don't want you type thing. You can't. We love you, now change everything about you type thing. Mm-hmm. So by the mid-1930s, the studio let him loose from his contract, and he just kind of was relegated to like bit parts here and there. And that's how he pretty much, kept on with his career till his death in the 1960s. If anybody who wants to know about his death, Google it. It is a trip. He was murdered in the Hollywood Hills. Anyway.
Oh, we should do that. Okay.
I should also. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with this, but so Navarro, he was a closeted gay man.
Oh my, Fredo, come! This is a whole. We gotta just do this guy.
Oh yeah, his whole thing is interesting. His life. Okay, so but
we should tab that for another time. We need to table that. That gets a post-it note.
So yeah, with the emergence of talking films, a lot of these silent film people, they tend to lose their careers because a lot of them were immigrants. They even if they weren't Spanish, or Spanish speaking or from Latin America, they were from other countries. So like Valentino, although he died before the talking films, he was from Italy, so he had an accent as well. There was a couple of them that had accents. Very few of them were able to transition to talking films. So with this, the role of the Latin lover was being cast more and more by Anglo men. Eventually, the stereotype did die out by the 1940s in American cinema. I want to be very clear, only in American cinema, because in Latin America, this stereotype of the Latin lover, another one that we just kind of leaned into, right? And I think it's because it speaks to a machismo of a primal of like, yeah, I could get all the ladies type thing.
Well, and also understandably, after having lived through it, having to survive negative stereotypes, for so long, you kind of see a positive stereotype and maybe want to own that a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's understandable. But I think we have reached a time where we understand how problematic the Latin lover role can be.
I mean, tell that to the people writing telenovelas.
They did not get the memo, honey. They did not get a lot of memos. They didn't get the colorism memo.
They hit every single one of these stereotypes.
I know.
The Latin lover as a stereotype in American cinema kind of died out until, that is, in the 1990s, for a brief moment, there was, I don't know if you remember, Minerva, you were a little young, but there was a Latin explosion. All of a sudden, we saw an emergence of Latin stars.
Is this Ricky Martin?
Well, yeah, Ricky Martin, Jennifer Lopez, Cameron Diaz, Salma Hayek, and Antonio Banderas. So he kind of brought back that sort of reemergence of like a Latin lover. He was big in the 1990s.
I remember.
He was a leading man, and he definitely portrayed that suave, debonair, ethnic but not too ethnic in this portrayal, right? So Antonio Banderas was one of the last ones. I really can't think of any new ones. Because again, I think we've sort of moved past that, right? I want to say that.
I don't know. No, with that new J-Lo movie Maluma's in, I'm just hopeful that's not like the role they gave him. We'll find out. Stay tuned, because we may discuss that.
All right. So similarly, to the Latin lover, we have the harlot or the sex bot, the sexy Latina stereotype. This is, again, this stereotype is still here and has been around since, again, the inception of American cinema. In the early years of cinema, the stereotype would be paired with the bandido, because it was, it would be this mysterious woman who would show up and have maybe dubious intentions. She was there to lead our main character astray from his mission.
With her body.
With her raw sexuality, okay? So, eventually it evolved to being more of a feisty sidekick, but still with the right amount of sexuality. You know what I'm saying?
Which is utterly and completely.
Yeah. But, like, it wasn't necessarily evil, right? So stereotypical characteristics assigned to Latinas included addictively romantic, sensual, sexual, and at times dangerous. I'm quoting this.
Of course you are.
Stars from the early years of Hollywood include Dolores Del Rio and Lupe Velez, who became known and famous for the Mexican Spitfire films. This was literally a series of films with the word Mexican Spitfire in it, and it was just essentially these were comedies where very similar to I Love Lucy, where she was a Mexican woman who left her hometown in Mexico with dreams of stardom and whatever, and she married some white man, and comedy ensues because she's beautiful, she's a singer, dancer. And he's just some schlub. But these are the comedies, guys.
How endearing.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to be clear, everything you described about like the Latina role is exactly like however you talked about it in evolving it's in its evolution and in its sort of original form continues to exist.
Yeah.
Like, that is just...
Absolutely.
Those are the only roles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I mean, Jennifer Lopez has made an entire career out of it, where she also has told the line where she gets to be the hero, but sexy.
It's just, it's really frustrating.
Yeah, so
and it continues to frustrate, and I say this, as a Latina who has to sort of day-to-day confront the world with, like, these images being the ones that people have been conditioned to, especially if you're not around Latinos and, like, or Latinx people, if you're, like, experiencing the world with whoever you are from wherever you are, and it's not centered in Latinidad or whatever, you, whether you are aware of it or not, are like living with these sort of images of what we are, and it can be really frustrating just dealing with just having to be compared to those kinds of images.
Going back to the 1990s and the Latin explosion, I think there were a few stars, Latina stars out there that really did have to toe the line in terms of like, oh, I'm going to be sexual, but also they had to fight back, and there is a real danger to this.
Of course, yeah.
Like when we're talking about like Salma Hayek and what we learned, what she had to go through to make Frida, and against Harvey Weinstein. And the harassment and, the sexual assault that took place, these are real things that happen on a day-to-day. And they have not just to, like, celebrities. They happen, to regular, everyday people because of these images that we've been seeing for literally a century of Latina women being overly sexualized, vilified. So...
not necessarily represented as people with ideas or people with real thoughts at all.
No, it's not until recently that you have a little more complex people, where it's okay to be, sexual, but also like, hey, I do have a brain. I do have these ideas. I have thoughts. I'm a complex human being.
Yeah.
So, I think women like, America Ferrera, Gina Rodriguez, even Eva Longoria. These are women who are starting to make a new path for the Latina representation in Hollywood. Though, notice what I said, none of these women are black Latina women. I think they're coming up, but it's still not there. And with any of these stereotypes, black Latinos have been erased entirely. Oh,
entirely. And so I did want to make sure we talked about that because, like, in its entirety. I mean, even, like, the black Latinos that we know today that are in film have had to basically erase their Latinidad entirely, and they play, like, black American roles mostly.
I mean, and we could go. This is a whole separate topic of like black representation.
We should do a whole episode on that. So what I'm trying to say is that they want to perpetuate certain ideas about certain people, and I think what I'm seeing now and black Latinas being brought up, honestly, that only happened because of Orange Is the New Black. All of the black Latinas that have got roles more recently, that's happening now. Specifically because of one show that was able to show the diversity in Latinos in a way that we haven't seen on screen ever for like a show that's mainstream for Americans. So, or really anywhere. So, I do think like that's kind of like there's so much work to do because it's just one show. And then we have this one example of a time when it happened. It should be pervasive. This should have opened up like a million doors for like a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know. I see Dasha Polanco getting roles in different like Netflix shows and things like that. I'd like to see more. how do you say Selenis?
Selenis, yeah.
Yeah, Selenis also, again, has a really long career. And has been doing a lot of like smaller roles like that. I would love to see her do a bigger role. Like there are just so many people, so many voices that need to be heard, and so many experiences and stories that we can share. And I would love to see one centering Blackness and Latinos.
Yeah, definitely.
One. I would like to see 1 million.
Yeah, or just and this is going off in a completely different direction, but like at least no, and it's fine. At least showing one that a movie about Black experience that includes the Black Latino experience, right? Like And
listen, for many of us, that's just like a day to day. Like we
live side by side.
We just all have like that in one space. Like everybody, and I do understand that there are a ton of stories we can tell about Latinos that don't include any Blackness at all, and that's all fine and good. But like we've seen very many stories like that. There are so many Latinos that live in this world of color where there's like all kinds of people, and I feel like that isn't like showcased as much, and that's why I think a lot of people deal with a lot of BS where they're like, oh no, you're not Dominican because this is what Dominican people look like. No, you're not Colombian because this is what Colombian people look like. And like that's just not that simple.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have I gotten like, oh, you're not Nicaraguan.
Right.
You don't look like one. Because everybody has a stereotype of what a Central American looks like, and it's usually more indigenous than what I look like. Although, like, I think I look indigenous. But, okay. So moving, speaking of indigenous representation, sort of, not really. But, there is a stereotype in terms of, like, that they fit into, or not that the indigenous people fit into it, they were just put into. And that is the role of the buffoon or female clown. So, these are usually simple-minded, they're portrayed as simple-minded, lazy, don't really know much about the world, they're subservient to white people, they usually have thick accents or don't speak English at all, and are the butt of the jokes. So these characters tend to be those with more indigenous features. And again, their culture is played up for laughs. Coming to mind, and I didn't do this in the research, but it just came to mind, like the Looney Tunes cartoons, the little mouse that goes arriba arriba. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's one like pervasive example in our childhood that we're just like So yes, the stereotype was so pervasive, and I'm not sure which way it went. Right, like did it come from Latin America, or did it go to Latin America? Because in Latin American cinema, you have two of the biggest stars that fall into this category, which is Cantinflas.
Yes.
And La India Maria.
La India Maria. Yes, that was the name I was trying to think of. And so my experience, obviously, with them is 100%, in my experience as, like, growing up watching Latino television. And, to your point of, like, where this could have come from, obviously is coming from, like, white supremacist delusion. And even if it started in Latino America, it was definitely born from, obviously trying to continue to create oppressive images of indigenous people or black people. And obviously in this case, indigenous people. And I did want to, like, make sure we kind of address this to make sure we're clear about when we talk about white supremacist delusion, when we talk about the ladder, when we talk about the hierarchy, this is a concept. Race is a concept. Racism is a concept. And when we talk about white supremacist delusion, we don't want to say white supremacy and therefore validate the existence of white supremacy. White supremacy is a delusion. And I learned this from the great Sonya Renee Taylor, who wrote The Body Is Not an Apology. If you guys have any extra time, just please check out her Instagram. She's absolutely amazing. Her IGTVs, she just goes in on a whole bunch of topics that discuss white supremacist delusion, and she explains it in very thought-provoking ways that really make you think about this as a concept and not necessarily centering whiteness around your idea about it, because whiteness is a construct. Everything is. So the idea about it is you're thinking about it as an idea, and you're thinking about it as how this idea pervasively interrupts our experiences and how it's sort of sewn into every fiber of who we are, because these are systems that were developed long before us for profit. And so we have to understand that at the center of a lot of these ideas, when we talk about La India Maria, when we talk about Cantinflas and all this stuff, these are ideas, these are images that we saw as children. That is part of what makes us sort of create these ideas about ourselves and then try our most to lean into whiteness and the idea of whiteness because of the supremacist delusion that creates. Because we see whiteness portrayed as smart, whole, correct, beautiful.
The standard.
The standard. And everything else not quite, or to be laughed at, or not enough. So as we internalized these things over and over again, and to survive in many ways, we had to internalize them. So we're not wrong or bad for having experienced the world this way. It's just to say that that these are sort of things that we saw, and we just now have the privilege to be able to question those things and to push back on those things and to understand them as concepts. It's a well-oiled machine that at this point runs itself, and each individual human functioning on planet Earth needs to do the internal work to attempt to dismantle this system.
You know, in terms of going back to the buffoon or female clown, it's not, it be very clear, it's not just for indigenous looking people, right? But it is, the whole joke around this stereotype is that the culture is a joke. That the person's history, community, that is a joke. You know, one of our favorite movies, The Birdcage, when you think about that character that Hank Azaria played, the Guatemalan maid, you know, again, when we're talking about like having that thing where like you're living a dual, like cognitive dissonance, where I'm like, I could enjoy this, but I could also criticize it in the back of my head, right? Because here is this white man putting on a accent that's not really Guatemalan. But
so bad. It was so bad.
Putting on an accent and playing up the buffoonery of being Guatemalan.
Like he literally,
it's my Guatemalanness.
No, like one of his attributes is that he doesn't wear shoes.
Shoes, exactly.
That's even realistic. Like, how does he go outside? But like these are he's a
Latino living in Miami. He doesn't wear shoes.
Like that doesn't seem possible. But the idea is right that we're perpetuating this idea that this man from Guatemala he's just not the kind of person who can wear shoes. What?
Yeah.
Like, they sold this idea, and we all ate it up. We bought it. We laughed. We thought it was great.
And that was just one. That's just one example.
Yeah.
Like that. I you know, again, in Latinos, in Latin America, really perpetuate this, and I think we have a lot of work to do. And that's why when Yalitza Aparicio was nominated for an Oscar, it was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because again, going back to the standard being whiteness as a standard, and having her emerge as the lead actress, having her on the cover of Vogue Mexico is a huge, huge deal. So there are other stereotypes that I think this is good for now. Obviously, there are others out there, and I urge you to please, do some research on all of them. One good book. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from the book, or the last thing that we'll talk about is this quote. So Latino Images in Film, Stereotypes, Subversion, and Resistance by Charles Ramírez Berg. Not Ramírez Berg, Ramírez Berg. This is a quote, and I want to hear your thought on it. So, in the United States, especially in the Southwest, manifest destiny meant taking land from Mexico, displacing Mexican landowners, subjugating Tejanos, Hispanos, and Californios. Those are Texans, Mexicans, Californians of Mexican heritage. And exploiting them as cheap and expendable labor. In order to rationalize the expansionist goals laid out by the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny, Latinos, whether U.S. citizens, newly arrived migrants from the South, or Latin Americans in their own countries, needed to be shown as lesser beings. Movie stereotyping of Latinos, therefore, has been and continues to be a part of an American imperialistic discourse about who should rule the hemisphere.
Eso. Very well put.
Absolutely. Hollywood continues to perpetuate this idea of American exceptionalism and the United States' right to pretty much just go in and fuck shit up in Latin America.
Own and conquer, yeah.
Okay, so I think that about wraps it up for this week. Thank you for joining us.
Ha-home. See you soon. Follow us on social media. You can follow our podcast at AFAAKPod. That's at AFAAK Pod. Or follow our hosts, Minerva at It's Minerva Angel and at Fredo_B on Twitter.